Commander Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES Horizon and watched the alien space station grow larger on the main screen. The massive structure looked like a metal flower with 12 petals, each one representing a different species in the galactic hegemony. After 3 months of travel from Earth, they had finally reached Nexus Prime, the capital world of the most powerful alliance in known space. Jake felt excited and nervous at the same time. This was humanity's first official meeting with the hegemony. For 50 years, humans had been exploring space and building colonies on distant worlds. They had met a few alien traders and explorers, but nothing like this. The hegemony controlled thousands of star systems and had been watching humanity for decades. Chief Science Officer Lisa Carter walked up to Jake with a datapad in her hands. She had been studying everything they knew about the 12 alien species for months. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and her blue eyes showed the same mix of excitement and worry that Jake felt. "The readings are strange, Commander," Lisa said quietly. "Their energy signatures don't match what we expected from the reports." Security Chief Ben Rodriguez turned from his station near the weapons controls. The tall, dark-haired man had been a Marine before joining the Exploration Service. His job was to keep the diplomatic team safe, but something about this whole mission made him uncomfortable. "Maybe they're just being careful," Ben said. "We're armed strangers coming to their most important world." Communications specialist Amy Brooks looked up from her console. The young woman with red hair had learned 6 alien languages for this mission. She was their link to understanding what the hegemony really wanted from humanity. "Incoming transmission, Commander," Amy announced. "Audio and visual." The main screen flickered and showed an alien face. The being looked like it was made of living rock with glowing cracks running through its gray skin. 2 orange eyes stared at them without blinking. This was Chancellor Zethmore of the Vorthak Empire, the most powerful species in the hegemony. "Human vessel Horizon, you are welcome at Nexus Prime," the alien said in perfect English. "Follow the guidance signals to Docking Bay 7. Your diplomatic party will be escorted to the ceremonial chambers." Jake stepped forward. "Thank you, Chancellor. We're honored to be here and look forward to beginning formal relations between humanity and the hegemony." The alien's expression didn't change. "Indeed, many things will begin today." The transmission ended, leaving the bridge crew in silence. Something about the Chancellor's tone made Jake's skin crawl, but he pushed the feeling aside. This was too important to let paranoia ruin everything. The docking process took 2 hours. The Horizon was a small ship compared to the massive alien vessels in the station's bays. Jake watched through the viewports as robotic arms guided them into position. Everything looked normal for a space station, but Ben kept pointing out things that seemed more like prison features than diplomatic ones. "Those aren't just docking clamps," Ben said, studying the mechanical arms that locked onto their ship. "Those could hold us here permanently if they wanted." "You're being paranoid," Lisa replied, but she was recording everything with her scanner. "This is the most important moment in human history. Let's not mess it up by assuming the worst." Mindai was listening to alien communications on her headset. "I'm picking up transmissions in 12 different languages. They're talking about something called the containers and psychological profiles." Jake felt his stomach tighten. Could be translation errors. Alien languages don't always convert perfectly. The airlock opened with a hiss, and 4 alien guards entered the ship. They were tall, insect-like creatures with 4 arms and compound eyes. They carried weapons that hummed with energy. Behind them came a floating sphere that spoke with a mechanical voice. "Diplomatic party will follow for ceremony," the sphere announced. "All weapons and recording devices must remain on vessel." Ben's hand moved toward his sidearm. "That's not standard diplomatic protocol. It's their station, their rules," Jake said, though every instinct told him something was wrong. He handed over his datapad and emergency beacon. Lisa and Amy did the same. Ben reluctantly gave up his weapon and scanner. The aliens led them through corridors that seemed to stretch forever. The walls were covered in symbols from different species, but Amy noticed they all seemed to be warnings or restrictions. Signs that said, "Containment area" and "Authorized personnel only" appeared more frequently as they walked. "This doesn't look like the way to a ceremony hall," Lisa whispered. One of the insect guards clicked its mandibles. Silence required for sacred preparation. They entered a large room with a high ceiling. 12 thrones arranged in a circle dominated the space, each one designed for a different type of alien body. The Vorthak Chancellor sat in the largest throne, made of black metal that seemed to absorb light. Other species representatives filled the remaining seats. "Welcome, humans," Chancellor Zethmore said. "You have traveled far to be here." Jake stepped forward. "We're grateful for this opportunity to establish peaceful relations between our peoples." The alien leader's rocky face cracked in what might have been a smile. "Peace is indeed what we offer, a very special kind of peace." The floor beneath the humans' feet began to glow. Energy fields sprang up around them, creating invisible walls. Jake tried to move forward but hit a barrier that felt like solid glass. "What is this?" Ben shouted, reaching for a weapon that wasn't there. "This is containment," the Chancellor replied calmly. "Humanity has become too dangerous to remain free. Your species advances too quickly, builds weapons too powerful, and spreads too far. You will be kept safe in our facilities until you learn to accept proper limitations." Lisa pulled out her scanner before remembering she had surrendered it. "You can't do this. We came here in peace." "And in peace you shall remain," said a new voice. A creature that looked like living liquid flowed into the room. "In our carefully designed containment facility on Kethvar Moon, you will have everything you need except the ability to threaten galactic stability." Amy was listening to the alien communications again through her universal translator implant. "They're talking about 200 humans. They didn't just capture us. They've been collecting people from our colonies." The energy field around them intensified, and Jake felt his consciousness starting to fade. The last thing he heard was Chancellor Zethmore explaining how the hegemony had studied human psychology and designed the perfect prison to break their spirit. "You will learn that resistance is pointless," the alien said as darkness closed in. "Every species learns this lesson eventually." Jake tried to stay awake, tried to think of a way out, but the alien technology was too advanced. As he lost consciousness, one thought burned in his mind. The hegemony had made a mistake. They thought they understood humans, but they had no idea what they had just unleashed. Jake Morrison woke up in a white room with no windows. The walls seemed to glow with their own light, and he couldn't find any doors or controls. His head felt heavy from whatever drug the aliens had used to knock him out. He tried to remember how he got here, and the memories came flooding back. The trap at Nexus Prime, the energy fields, and Chancellor Zethmore's cold voice explaining their capture. He stood up slowly and examined the room. It was about 10 feet square with a ceiling just high enough that he couldn't reach it. There was a bed that folded out from one wall, a small table, and what looked like a bathroom area behind a privacy screen. Food appeared on the table through a slot in the wall 3 times a day, but Jake had no way to tell what time it was. The worst part was the silence. No sounds came from outside his cell, and his own voice seemed muffled when he tried to shout. The aliens had designed this place to break human spirits through isolation. They wanted to make the prisoners feel completely alone and helpless, but humans were not that easy to break. After what felt like several days, Jake noticed something. The light in his room had a very slight flicker, almost too small to see. It happened in patterns that seemed random at first, but as he watched more carefully, he realized someone was controlling it. The flickers came in groups of short and long pulses, like an old Morse code system from Earth's history. Jake pressed his face against the wall and listened carefully. Very faint sounds came through the material, so quiet that alien sensors probably couldn't detect them. Tapping noises in the same pattern as the light flickers. Someone was trying to communicate. He started tapping back, using the simple dot-dash pattern he remembered from military training. After several hours of careful work, he made contact with the person in the next cell. It was Amy Brooks, the communications specialist from his ship. She had been working on a way to talk to other prisoners since she woke up. Amy had discovered that the prison walls conducted sound if you knew exactly where to tap. The aliens had built the facility using technology from 12 different species. and the materials didn't work together perfectly. There were tiny gaps in the soundproofing that a human could find if they were patient enough. Over the next week, Amy and Jake built a communication network that connected dozens of prisoners. They learned that the facility held humans from colonies all across space. Scientists, soldiers, engineers, pilots, and ordinary colonists had all been captured during fake diplomatic meetings or surprise raids on their settlements. Dr. Marcus Webb was in a cell 2 levels down. The xenobiologist had been studying their alien captors by observing the guards who brought food and checked on the prisoners. He discovered that the hegemony species all had blind spots in their thinking. They were so advanced that they couldn't imagine how primitive beings like humans might find ways around their technology. Former Marine Sergeant Katie Thompson was organizing the other prisoners into small groups through the tapping network. Each group had specific jobs like gathering information, studying the facility's layout, or developing plans for resistance. Katie had been captured during a raid on her colony's mining station, but she brought military experience that the other prisoners desperately needed. Engineer Tony Liu had been working on the most important discovery of all. The containment cells could be modified from the inside if someone understood the basic principles. The aliens used energy fields to create the walls and barriers, but those fields had to be generated by equipment somewhere in the facility. Tony was mapping the power systems by watching how the lights and food delivery mechanisms worked. Pilot Sandra Price had been taken during a supply run to an outer colony. She was using her knowledge of spacecraft and navigation to figure out where they were being held. By watching the movement of lights outside the tiny air vents in each cell, she determined they were on a moon that orbited a gas giant. The facility was built inside a crater to hide it from long-range scanners. The prisoners learned more disturbing information as their network grew. Amy intercepted alien communications that revealed the true purpose of their capture. The hegemony wasn't just trying to control humanity. They were planning to use human technology and tactics against 3 other species that had been resisting hegemony expansion. The aquatic Murthani had developed underwater cities that the hegemony couldn't attack effectively. The crystalline Shelteth lived in asteroid fields where traditional weapons were useless. The energy-based Lumara existed as pure thought and couldn't be contained by normal means. All 3 species had successfully fought off hegemony invasion attempts for decades. But humans had shown an ability to adapt to any environment and develop new solutions to impossible problems. The hegemony wanted to study captured humans and steal their techniques. Then they would build weapons and strategies that could defeat the 3 resistant species. Dr. Webb made the most shocking discovery during his 3rd week in captivity. The facility's power source wasn't a normal generator or reactor. It was a captured Lumara entity, a being of pure energy that was being tortured to produce electricity for the prison. The alien creature was trapped in machinery that forced it to generate power while keeping it conscious and in constant pain. This changed everything for the human prisoners. They weren't just fighting for their own freedom anymore. They were fighting to save another species from the same kind of imprisonment. The knowledge that their captors were willing to torture a sentient being for convenience made the humans angrier than any amount of personal suffering could. Jake felt the mood of the prison community change after Webb shared his discovery. The quiet resignation that some prisoners had shown disappeared completely. Now they had a purpose beyond escape. They were going to make sure the hegemony paid for every crime they had committed. Katie Thompson's resistance network expanded beyond simple communication. The prisoners began sharing technical knowledge, combat techniques, and survival skills through their tapping system. Tony Liu taught others how to identify weaknesses in alien technology. Sandra Price explained spacecraft systems and navigation. Dr. Webb shared everything he had learned about alien psychology and biology. Most importantly, they began to coordinate their daily activities. Instead of random behavior that the aliens expected from desperate prisoners, the humans started acting with purpose. They tested their captors' responses, mapped guard routines, and identified the best times to attempt modifications to their cells. The aliens never suspected that their perfectly isolated prisoners had built one of the most effective resistance networks in galactic history. They thought humans would break under solitary confinement like every other species they had captured. They had no idea that humans were actually at their most dangerous when they had time to think, plan, and remember what they were fighting for. Jake lay on his narrow bed after another day of careful communication and planning. The aliens thought they had caged humanity's most dangerous representatives. They had no idea that they had actually gathered together the exact people who could turn their perfect prison into the foundation of their own destruction. The storm was building in the darkness, and soon the hegemony would learn what happened when you gave humans enough time to get truly angry. The 5th week of imprisonment brought a breakthrough that changed everything. Dr. Marcus Webb had been studying the guard rotation patterns and noticed something the aliens had missed about their own behavior. Each of the 12 hegemony species had fundamental blind spots in how they thought and acted. The Vorthak were so logical that they couldn't imagine emotional responses. The insect-like Cathani were so focused on following orders that they never questioned unusual patterns. The aquatic species couldn't understand how land creatures might use vertical space. Webb shared this information through the tapping network, and suddenly the human prisoners realized they had been thinking about their situation all wrong. They weren't fighting one unified enemy. They were fighting 12 different species who had never really learned to work together effectively. The hegemony looked powerful from the outside, but it was actually held together by fear and convenience rather than true cooperation. Jake Morrison received this news while working on his latest project. Tony Liu had taught him how to identify the energy conduits that powered his cell's containment field. By pressing his ear against specific points on the walls, Jake could hear the subtle humming that indicated power flow. He was mapping the entire electrical system of his section, one careful listening session at a time. The breakthrough came when Jake realized that the power conduits were designed by the Vorthak, but the monitoring systems were built by a different species. The two technologies worked together, but they didn't share information perfectly. There were moments, lasting only a few seconds, when the monitoring system couldn't detect what was happening in the power conduits. Amy Brooks had been working on a different angle. Her communications expertise let her analyze the alien languages used by the guards. She discovered that the different species used completely different concepts for time, space, and security. When a Vorthak guard told a Cathani worker to secure the containment systems, they meant different things by the word secure. These misunderstandings created tiny gaps in the prison's defenses. Katie Thompson was building on these discoveries to create a more detailed resistance plan. Her military training helped her understand how to turn the aliens' weaknesses into tactical advantages. She organized the prisoners into specialized teams that could exploit specific vulnerabilities in each species' psychology. The engineering team led by Tony Liu had made the most important discovery. The containment cells weren't just prisons. They were actually sophisticated machines that could be reprogrammed if someone understood the underlying principles. The aliens had built the cells to suppress human creativity and problem-solving abilities, but Tony realized the same technology could be used to amplify those traits instead. Working during the brief power monitoring gaps that Jake had identified, Tony began making tiny modifications to his cell systems. Instead of dampening his brain activity, he reconfigured the energy fields to enhance his concentration and memory. The changes were so small that the alien sensors couldn't detect them, but the effect on Tony's thinking was dramatic. Sandra Price was using her enhanced mental clarity to solve the navigation puzzle that had been bothering her for weeks. She had figured out that they were imprisoned on Kethvar Moon, but something about the facility's location didn't make sense. The crater they were built into was too perfectly positioned relative to the gas giant's orbit. It couldn't be natural. After days of careful observation and calculation, Sandra realized the truth. The crater wasn't a natural formation or an accident. It was the impact site where the Lum-Ara entity had been captured. The energy being had crashed here while trying to escape from the hegemony, and the aliens had built their prison facility directly on top of its landing site. This explained why the torture device that powered the prison was so effective. The Lum-Ara wasn't just providing electricity. It was trapped in the exact spot where it had suffered its greatest defeat, forced to relive its capture every moment while powering the systems that kept it imprisoned. Dr. Webb felt sick when he learned this information. The level of cruelty involved in the prison's design went beyond simple efficiency. The hegemony had deliberately chosen the most psychologically damaging way to use their captive. It revealed something about their character that made Webb realize They were fighting an enemy that truly had no limits, but the discovery also provided hope. If the Lumara was the power source for the entire facility, then freeing it would shut down all the containment systems at once. The human prisoners wouldn't need to escape one cell at a time. They could liberate everyone simultaneously while striking a blow against their captor's cruelest project. The challenge was figuring out how to reach the power core. Sandra's observations suggested it was located at the center of the facility, probably several levels below the prisoner cells. Getting there would require coordinated action by dozens of people, and perfect timing to avoid the guard patrols. Katie Thompson began developing a plan that used everything they had learned about alien psychology. The Vorthak guards were logical, but inflexible. They followed predictable patterns and couldn't adapt quickly to unexpected situations. The Kethani workers were obedient, but unimaginative. They would follow their assigned duties even if the situation around them was falling apart. Other species had their own exploitable weaknesses. The aquatic guards couldn't move effectively outside specially designed chambers. The energy-based species became confused in areas with strong electromagnetic interference. The crystalline beings were vulnerable to specific sound frequencies that human voices could produce. Amy Brooks was working on the communication aspect of the plan. The human resistance network would need to coordinate actions across the entire facility simultaneously. She had identified the exact frequencies and timing patterns that could carry messages through the prison structure without triggering alien detection systems. Tony Liu was refining his cell modification techniques and teaching them to other prisoners. The goal was to create a cascade effect where each modified cell would help modify the adjacent ones. Once enough cells were converted, the humans would have effective control over large sections of the facility's infrastructure. Most importantly, Jake Morrison was working on the psychological preparation needed for their plan to succeed. Breaking out of prison was one thing, but what they were planning was essentially a war against the most powerful alliance in the galaxy. Every human prisoner would need to be mentally ready for the consequences of their actions. The aliens had studied human behavior and decided that solitary confinement would break their spirits. They had completely misunderstood what humans did when they had time to think. Instead of becoming depressed and helpless, the prisoners had used their isolation to become more focused and determined than they had ever been in their lives. Jake lay on his bed during what he had calculated was the night shift, and listened to the subtle sounds of preparation happening throughout the facility. Prisoners were testing their modified equipment, guards were following their predictable routes, and somewhere far below, a tortured energy being was powering the systems that would soon be turned against their creators. The hegemony thought they had created the perfect prison for humanity's most dangerous individuals. They had no idea that they had actually built the perfect training ground for the most motivated and focused humans in galactic history. The storm that had been building in the darkness was almost ready to break free, and when it did, nothing in the galaxy would ever be the same. The signal came during what the aliens called a compliance assessment. Every few weeks, the hegemony administrators would test their prisoners' mental state by offering fake opportunities for cooperation. They believed that broken spirits would eventually accept any chance at better treatment, even if it meant betraying their own species. Jake Morrison had been expecting this test. When the mechanical voice announced that voluntary cooperation subjects would receive enhanced accommodation privileges, he knew it was time. Through the communication network, word spread instantly to all 200 human prisoners. The storm they had been building for 7 weeks was about to break. The first phase began in Tony Liu's cell. The engineer had spent days preparing his containment field modifications for this exact moment. When he activated the cascade sequence, his cell's energy systems didn't just shut down. They reversed polarity and began amplifying his neural activity while sending power surges through the facility's grid. The effect spread from cell to cell like a chain reaction. Each modified containment unit boosted the signal and passed it along to the next. Within 30 seconds, every human prisoner had enhanced mental clarity and communication abilities, while the facility's power systems began overloading in carefully controlled ways. Amy Brooks coordinated the communication aspect of the breakout. Using her enhanced abilities, she could now transmit complex tactical information through the facility's structure at near telepathic speeds. Every prisoner knew exactly what their role was and when to execute it. Katie Thompson's combat teams moved first. The former Marine had identified the optimal moment when guard rotations created temporary blind spots in facility security. Using tools improvised from cell components and furniture, her teams began systematically neutralizing alien guards while capturing their equipment. The Vorthak guards were expecting desperate humans trying to escape individual cells. They had no preparation for coordinated military tactics executed by people who had studied their weaknesses for weeks. The logical aliens couldn't adapt quickly enough to the humans' unpredictable strategies. Sandra Price led the navigation and technical teams toward the facility's control centers. Her enhanced spatial awareness allowed her to guide groups through maintenance passages and emergency routes that the aliens had forgotten existed. The prison had been built so well that its own safety systems became highways for the human resistance. Dr. Webb headed the most crucial mission. His team fought their way toward the power core where the Lum-Ara entity was being tortured. They encountered heavier resistance as they went deeper into the facility, but the aliens' psychological profiles worked against them. Each species expected threats from their traditional enemies, not from primitive creatures who should have been broken by isolation. The humans didn't fight like any enemy the hegemony had faced before. They used the facility's own systems against its defenders, turning security doors into traps and life support systems into weapons. Tony Liu's engineering knowledge let them reprogram alien technology in ways its creators had never imagined possible. When Dr. Webb's team reached the power core, they found something that made even battle-hardened soldiers stop in shock. The Lum-Ara entity wasn't just trapped in machinery. It was being held in a crystalline matrix that forced the energy being to experience its capture and torture in an endless loop. The aliens hadn't just imprisoned it. They had created a hell specifically designed for a creature of pure thought and energy. Webb began working on the liberation process while his team held off alien reinforcements. The torture device was incredibly complex, designed by all 12 hegemony species working together. But the humans had one advantage the aliens hadn't expected. The Lum-Ara entity was still conscious and aware of what was happening. As Webb worked to free it, the energy being began communicating through fluctuations in the facility's power grid. It shared technical information about the prison's construction and revealed the locations of other similar facilities across the galaxy. More importantly, it provided the humans with detailed intelligence about hegemony military capabilities and weaknesses. The liberation of the Lum-Ara entity created a massive energy surge that knocked out most of the facility's systems. But instead of escaping immediately, the freed being chose to help its liberators. It used its energy manipulation abilities to amplify the humans' communication systems, turning the prison facility into a broadcasting station capable of reaching across the galaxy. Amy Brooks coordinated the transmission of the most important message in galactic history. The signal contained detailed information about hegemony expansion plans, the locations of other prison facilities, and most critically, proof that the mighty galactic hegemony could be defeated by determined resistance. The message reached the oppressed Murthani in their underwater cities, showing them human techniques for fighting in hostile environments. It reached the crystalline Shalteth in their asteroid homes, sharing strategies for using mobility and surprise against larger forces. It reached other Lum-Ara entities scattered across space, proving that their captured cousin could be freed and the hegemony could be resisted. But the message also reached human colonies that had been preparing for war since the UES Horizon disappeared 7 weeks earlier. Earth's military had spent months building ships and training soldiers for a rescue mission that was no longer needed. Instead, they received detailed intelligence about enemy capabilities and an invitation to join a galaxy-wide rebellion. The aliens tried to regain control of their facility, but the humans had turned it into a fortress. They used captured weapons and equipment to establish defensive positions, while the Lum-Ara entity provided unlimited power for their operations. The prison that was supposed to break human spirits had become the headquarters of the largest resistance movement in galactic history. Chancellor Zethmore himself arrived with a hegemony battle fleet, expecting to find escaped prisoners hiding in space. Instead, he found the facility still intact and operational, but completely under human control. Worse, the facility was now broadcasting rebellion instructions to oppressed species across dozens of star systems. The Chancellor demanded to speak with the human leaders. Jake Morrison, still wearing the simple clothes he had been captured in 7 weeks earlier, appeared on the facility's main communication screen. Behind him stood the other human prisoners, no longer looking like broken captives but like soldiers, who had just won the first battle of a much larger war. "You will return control of this facility immediately," Zethmore demanded. "Your resistance is pointless. We have fleets that could destroy your entire species." Jake's response was calm and confident. "Chancellor, you tried to cage the storm. Now you get to see what happens when it breaks free." The liberation of Kethvar prison facility was just the beginning. The humans had proven that the hegemony could be defeated, and they had given hope to every oppressed species in the galaxy. More importantly, they had shown that freedom was contagious, and that sometimes the greatest mistake a tyrant could make was giving their victims time to think, plan, and remember what they were fighting for. The storm had broken free, and nothing would ever be the same. Admiral Rick Turner emerged from hyperspace with the largest human fleet ever assembled, and found something he had never expected to see. The rescue mission he had planned for months was no longer needed. Instead of finding prisoners to save, he discovered that the humans had not only freed themselves but had turned their prison into the command center of a galaxy-wide rebellion. The UES Horizon crew and the other 200 captured humans were not waiting helplessly for rescue. They were commanding a growing coalition of liberated species and broadcasting tactical information to resistance movements across dozens of star systems. The prison facility on Kethvar Moon had become a fortress that challenged the entire hegemony power structure. Admiral Turner opened communications with Commander Jake Morrison, expecting to coordinate an evacuation. Instead, he found himself joining a military operation that had already begun reshaping galactic politics. The humans had done more than escape. They had proven that the hegemony could be defeated and had given hope to every oppressed species in known space. The coalition that formed around the liberated facility grew with stunning speed. The Marathani emerged from their underwater cities with ships designed for fluid combat that the hegemony had never seen before. The crystalline Shaltith brought their asteroid habitats, turning entire star systems into mobile fortresses. The energy-based Lumara shared their knowledge of power manipulation, giving the Alliance technologies that seemed impossible. Dr. Marcus Webb found himself serving as the Coalition's chief intelligence officer. His studies of alien psychology had revealed weaknesses in hegemony thinking that no one had ever exploited before. The 12 species that made up the hegemony had never really learned to work together effectively. They were held together by fear and habit rather than genuine cooperation. Each species had blind spots that the others couldn't cover. The Vorthak were logical but couldn't understand emotional motivation. The Kethani followed orders perfectly, but never questioned whether those orders made sense. The aquatic species couldn't fight effectively on land, while the crystalline beings were vulnerable to specific energy frequencies. Katie Thompson was training coalition forces in guerrilla warfare techniques that had never been used in space combat before. Human military doctrine emphasized adaptability and creative problem-solving, concepts that were completely foreign to hegemony thinking. The aliens had overwhelming technological advantages, but they had no idea how to fight an enemy that refused to follow traditional tactical patterns. Tony Liu was working with Lumara entities to upgrade coalition ships and weapons. The combination of human engineering creativity and energy, being power manipulation, produced technologies that seemed magical to other species. Ships that could phase through solid matter, weapons that turned enemy equipment against itself, and communication systems that worked faster than light across galactic distances. Amy Brooks had become the Coalition's voice to the galaxy. Her enhanced communication abilities let her coordinate resistance activities across thousands of star systems. Simultaneously, every day brought news of new species joining the rebellion, and reports of hegemony forces being defeated by opponents they had never expected to face. Chancellor Zethmore attempted to negotiate a peace settlement after the first major coalition victory. A hegemony fleet had tried to retake the Murthani home system and found itself fighting enemies that attacked from underwater, from space, and through dimensions they didn't even know existed. The defeat was so complete that other hegemony commanders began questioning whether the war could be won. Jake Morrison received the Chancellor's offer in the command center that had once been his prison cell. The alien leader was willing to recognize human territorial claims and release captured prisoners in exchange for ending the rebellion. It was the kind of compromise that might have seemed reasonable before the imprisonment at Kethvar. But the humans had learned too much about their enemies to accept partial solutions. The intelligence gathered from liberated facilities revealed that the hegemony had been planning to imprison dozens of other species using the same psychological manipulation techniques. There were construction sites for similar facilities throughout their territory, each one designed to break a different type of sentient being. More importantly, the humans had seen what the hegemony was capable of when they thought no one was watching. The torture of the Lumara entity had revealed a level of cruelty that went beyond military necessity. These were beings who would commit any atrocity if they thought it would help maintain their power. Jake's response to the Chancellor's offer became legendary across the galaxy. Standing in the facility where the hegemony had tried to break human spirits through isolation and despair, he delivered a message that reached every species in known space. "You offered us peace after you tried to cage our potential and steal our future," Jake said calmly. "You want to negotiate after torturing sentient beings for power and planning to enslave entire civilizations. But there can be no peace with tyrants who see other species as resources to be managed." The final campaign of what historians would later call the Liberation War lasted 6 months. The coalition didn't seek to destroy the hegemony species or conquer their territory. Instead, they systematically dismantled the power structures that allowed 12 species to dominate thousands of others. Prison facilities were liberated across the galaxy, freeing not just the intended victims, but also revealing the extent of hegemony crimes. Torture devices were destroyed, forced labor camps were shut down, and species that had been enslaved for centuries were given their freedom and the tools to defend it. The humans led by example rather than by conquest. They shared their technologies freely, taught their military techniques to anyone who wanted to learn them, and established a new galactic order based on voluntary cooperation rather than forced submission. Species that had been enemies for millennia found themselves working together against their common oppressors. The hegemony's collapse came not from military defeat, but from the realization that their subjects no longer feared them. When the Vorthak home system was surrounded by a coalition fleet that included representatives from 50 different species, Chancellor Zethmore finally understood what he had unleashed by trying to cage humanity. The surrender negotiations took place in the same chamber where the humans had been trapped months earlier. Jake Morrison sat across from the Chancellor in the room where he had first realized that the hegemony saw other species as things to be controlled rather than beings to be respected. "Your empire is finished," Jake said without anger or hatred. "Not because we destroyed it, but because you taught the galaxy that freedom is contagious. Every species you tried to control now knows they can resist successfully." Chancellor Zethmore's rocky face showed an emotion that might have been regret. "We maintained order for thousands of years. What will replace us?" "Something better," Jake replied. "A galaxy where species cooperate because they choose to, not because they're forced to. Where differences are celebrated instead of eliminated. Where the strongest protect the weakest instead of exploiting them." The transformation of galactic civilization took decades, but it began with the simple realization that no species had the right to decide what another species could become. The humans had proven that even the most carefully designed prison couldn't contain the potential of beings who refused to accept limitations on their growth and creativity. Years later, when students across the galaxy studied the Liberation War, they learned that humanity's greatest weapon had never been their technology or their tactics. It was their absolute refusal to accept that anyone else had the right to decide their destiny. The galactic hegemony had tried to cage the storm and learned too late that some forces of nature were too powerful to contain. The galaxy was free, and it would never accept chains again.